Good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to the All Bugs Good and Bad webinar series. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to type them into the chat boxes or into the chat box over on the left side of your screen. Today we have Charles Ray. He's Research Fellow with Auburn University, specializing in plant pathology and entomology. He will be presenting on bees, wasps, and hornets. They're all different. Charles?
Thank you, Lucy. As extension professionals, we all get questions throughout the year about someone calls in and they've got the little black hornets in their backyard or the big brown bees or whatever, and you really have to almost take each one of them through a little lesson on what they're actually trying to describe to you. But each of those is a very different entity, a wasp, a bee, and a hornet, and they have a lot of different implications for what you want to tell the homeowner. So with that being said, first few slides won't have many pictures, but we'll live with that. As I was practicing, I discovered I have a couple of typos, and anyone who can send in all my typos, I'll send them a photo of their favorite photo from the presentation, an 8 by 10. Okay. We often use the terms bees, wasps, and hornets interchangeably, but they're different in a number of different ways. Although all of them are in the insect order Hymenoptera, all of them are in a suborder called Apocrita, which just simply means they have a waist. They have a narrow place between the front of the body and the back of the body, as opposed to the sawflies, which have fat bodies end to end. And we're going to be talking about the aculeate Hymenoptera, which are the stinging Hymenoptera. Those that use their sting and venom as a weapon. It can be, every homeowner who calls in will tell you that it's an offensive weapon, when in fact it's pretty much a defensive weapon for the wasp, bee, or hornet they are talking about. And the stinger, as all entomologists should know, is simply a modified egg-laying tube. So because only females can lay eggs, only females can sting. Now, male wasp bee behavior is that if you grab one, it will probe you with its abdomen as though it were stinging you, but it cannot. Very few of us can stand there and watch a male wasp or bee probe us without just slinging it away, because your mind is geared up to getting stung. And even though the male can't sting, your reaction is to make it go away. I have a couple of photos of stingers. This is from a solitary wasp. This is showing the egg-laying tube, which is now modified as a weapon, excerpted, pushed out of the body. And here's another photo of another wasp. Again, this is their armature. This is what they use to defend their nest, or with a solitary wasp, overwhelm a prey. And the sting is probably the reason we're having this seminar, because the public is fascinated by something that can hurt them. Walter Schenkel in The Fire Ant says, something that can hurt you is the magnet pull that dangerous, destructive, and wild things exert on all true Southerners. And I'm sure it's true for everyone within the listening audience of where our presentation today goes. In most Hymenoptera, in most bees, wasps, and ants, and we'll talk about even what Hymenoptera means a little later, the egg goes down that tube and goes out the end. But in the stinging Hymenoptera, the egg is actually ejected from the opening at the base of the ovipositor, and only chemicals go out through their stinger. So when you're stung by a wasp, you're not getting an egg laid in you, and vice versa. When they're stinging a host, they're not laying an egg in the host at the time, at least with the group we're talking about today. Now, the current interpretation is that the sting evolved as a means to paralyze prey arthropods. That means that the ancestors of all the Hymenoptera we have, some of them developed a sting as a way to paralyze prey. And later, when some of the Hymenoptera became social, and social would be some of the bees, honeybees, bumblebees, some of the wasps, yellow jackets, paper wasp, that sting evolved into a defensive weapon. And in most of those, it has changed from what was being exuded by the primitive Hymenoptera. So in social Hymenoptera, the venom has been described as being almost designed to be instantly painful. They're not trying to kill you, they're trying to make it really hurt so that you'll leave. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the venom, and we're going to use information. There's a lot of information out there on yellow jacket venom, and so most of what this is taken from the yellow jacket venom literature, but it has a lot of implications for anything that stings. So the venom is a complex mixture of materials, and up to 50 different components may be present. So when they sting you, there's lots of things going in, and they fall into three basic types. There are small, non-proteinaceous molecules, and we'll explain each of these. They're what are called peptides, and there's some things, and there are enzymes and proteins. And they do different things. So the small, non-proteinaceous molecules are the primary cause of the pain from yellow jacket stings. So some histamine, some epinephrine, some other things, these little molecules cause a lot of pain almost immediately. And this venom is found in true hornets, paper wasp, even honeybees, which aren't terribly closely related. And then the second component of the peptides includes some things called hemolysins and neurotoxins, which nerve toxins, and compounds that cause mast cells, which are a type of white blood cell, to release histamine and other compounds. Again, it's almost as though it were designed to cause pain. And then the large molecules, which are primarily proteins and enzymes, don't really directly contribute to the pain. They pretty much enhance the pain. So they aid in spreading they make the quickly from the actual injection site. And there's some have some components that cause a little hemolysis or blood cell, your red blood cells burst open. Again, this causes a cascade effect, but it's all designed to cause pain. But the large molecules, while they don't directly contribute to the pain, are responsible for the development of the allergic reactions. But it's always in a subsequent sting event. And these enzymes are particularly allergenic. So no one has an allergic response on the first sting. The first time you're stung, you're responding, you're having just the normal response to the sting, which is a lot of pain, swelling, fever around the site, possibly some lysis of red blood cells. But these enzymes are the most important of the venom components because they're so strongly allergic, and the allergic reaction requires 2 exposures. As I said, no one has an allergic reaction on the first sting. It's the second sting or the third sting or the 10th sting. But it is estimated there's about 15 years between that initial sting to someone has a truly allergic or hypersensitive reaction. And the venom allergy rate in the U.S. population has been studied, and it's less than 1%. Now, every client that walks into your office is going to tell you they are allergic to yellow jacket or wasp stings. I don't think I've had a single person tell me that they weren't. That's usually, now I can't tolerate these stings because I'm allergic to them. Well, as true, tactful extension professionals, we bite our tongue, but if you compare the rate of people who are allergic to yellow jacket stings to those of asthma or hay fever, the hay fever is much, much, much more common. It's about 11%, and there is absolutely no relationship between the two. Someone tells you, well, I have asthma, I must be allergic to bee stings. Doesn't work that way. But the allergic reaction is the cause of most Hymenoptera-related deaths in the U.S., and they do occur. Again, remembering that it's about 15 years between the first sting and having an allergic reaction. So Hymenoptera kill very few people under the age of 40. And if you think about it, it would be very, very, very few under the age of 20, because a lot of us don't get stung sometimes as children. Although I started out early and still continue to get stung with monotonous regularity. But anyway, very few people under 20 are killed by a Hymenoptera sting. Now, the peak months for death are from August, or in August is August, with July and September closely following, and that corresponds to the maximum colony size. Yellow jackets in the south, maximum colony size is achieved in mid-August. So July, though, there's a lot of wasps out there. August, September, most of the workers are still viable. And it's, again, it's just some more statistics. Death from allergic reactions to Hymenoptera stings is usually very rapid, often within 20 minutes, almost all of it within an hour. If you're going to die, unfortunately, you're dead. So everyone who walks in and tells you they're allergic to yellow jacket stings or wasp stings, they must have made it to the hospital on the last one really quickly, and hopefully they're carrying their epinephrine pen. Now, with yellow jackets, when they sting you, they do a little more than just sting you. They also place an alarm pheromone on your skin. And this alarm pheromone basically says, come here, guy, come here, calls for all the additional workers to come on in, guys, and attack right here. So with the yellow jackets, you very often get a large number of stings in a small area. And as it turns out, yellow jacket, that alarm component is at least the same in at least the eastern and southern yellow jackets, so it's cross-specific. So you're going to elicit a response from other yellow jackets, even if not from the same colony or even species. And because this alarm pheromone is only semi-volatile, you may elicit a response for up to 14 hours. So there's a couple of things. If a client gets stung, you need to tell them not to go charging back out in the backyard to do something about it, because they're they're literally a walking target. I've experienced this. I did some work with perennial yellow jacket nests and forgot to take my boots on one occasion. And anyway, I was working around a nest and got stung in the ankle. And then went to another county, came back. It was about 3 hours later. I got stung again. The sting was within a quarter inch of the first sting. So this is not, it's not something trivial. Once you're stung, for the rest of the day, you're going to be more attractive. You're actually going to attract yellow jackets to sting you. So now, sort of what the topic of our discussion is about. Bees, wasps, and hornets, what are the differences? Well, they all have a waist, as we just mentioned, and they all have a different body arrangement than the standard insect. So we're going to use some terms that, you normally think about insects having a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. But with Hymenoptera, that first abdominal segment is fused with the thorax. So we call that the mesosoma, or middle body. And then the remainder of the abdomen we call the metasoma or the gaster. But, so the Hymenoptera in general are a little different than most insects. So let's talk first about the bees, and we can say that bees are vegetarians. That is probably something that sets them off from almost everything else in Hymenoptera. They're vegetarians throughout their lives. Almost all of them use pollen as a protein source, not only to feed their larvae, but also the egg layers, the queens and the socials, or the solitary bees, require pollen for their ovaries development. So they have to have pollen for their eggs to be produced. And then they use nectar as a carbohydrate source. Think of nectar as fuel. They fly to a flower, fuel up, then they go out and hunt pollen. There is one exception, which is sort of interesting, and there's a true bee of the genus, of the family Apidae, and is Trigona, but it uses, rather than pollen, they use carrion as a protein source. And with Trigona, the bees collect and masticate, that is, chew up carrion as a protein source. They still get their carbohydrates from plants, but they don't visit flowers. They either find fruit juice or they visit the exudates from extrafloral nectaries. And extrafloral nectaries are little places on the plant that exude sugar water, basically. Passion flower is a plant we have commonly planted as an ornamental and exists in the wild down here, and it has lots of little extrafloral nectaries. If you're ever out looking at passion flower, notice that the flowers will be sitting there open, but there'll be little bees and other insects just swarming all over the rest of the plant. And if you look real close, there's these little openings that they're getting sugar water from. So these Trigona bees, they make these little, what they call storage pots, which are something similar to the comb in the honeybee hive. And they will pack it with some honey-like material, or remember, honey is nectar that has been distilled, so to speak. So rather than distilling nectar, they're distilling either fruit juice or this exudate from extrafloral nectaries. But some of their storage pots have this paste made of a mixture of this, as well as little carrion and some bacteria, which you would expect to be growing in that wonderful mixture. And there's in one species, their pots contain almost pure masticated carrion with only a little honey-like material. Now, I've talked to some professional hymenopterists, and one of the things, I guess, is if they ever visit South America, they all have to try the honey of this particular bee, and they all agree that it tastes different. None of them said it tasted great. None of them said it tasted terrible, but they all agreed it tasted different. And one would imagine it would taste different. So what else makes a bee besides being a vegetarian? How are we going to follow the bees around to see what their diet is to determine if it's a bee or not? Well, no. Most bees have feathery hairs on a robust or thick body, and it gives them a fuzzy appearance. So you see something that's a Hymenoptera and it's really fuzzy, it's almost always one of the true bees. And then there's some technical things about the first tarsal segment, and it's broader than the others, and it's longer than the rest of them combined. And again, they have a waist, but they don't have a long extension between the mesosoma and the gaster. It is which we call a petiole, so they are not petiolate. There are only a few bees that are thin and relatively hairless, and most of those are stem borers, where you would imagine that if they've got a tiny little stem, their body shape is going to somewhat correspond to that long, thin stem. And there's a couple of families of bees that have those forms. And then there are a fairly large number of what are called kleptoparasitic forms, and these are sort of like cuckoo wasps. They slip into, and it's often one of their close relatives' nest, and they will lay an egg, and their egg will hatch before their relative's eggs hatch, and it usually will consume their relative's egg, and then they will eat the pollen that was placed there by their relative. So they're called kleptoparasitic. And there's a number of groups, bee groups, which have such forms, but there's actually a fair number of homeowners who will notice that there's more than one kind of bee in there around a certain area, usually it's ground bees, and they'll say, I've got 3 or 4 different bees swarming around this one area. Well, they've got, not only do they have the bees that are working hard, they have male bees, and the male bees will often look different than the females, and I think we're going to cover that in the next slide. But for bees, with the exception of the kleptoparasites, you could state that all 2,400 species in North America are beneficial. They are all pollinators. We don't have any of the carrion feeders this far north. Many of our native plants are dependent on these native pollinators. And with the exception of honeybees and bumblebees, these bees in general do not want to sting, and their stings are minor. And we'll talk about why that is in a couple of minutes. Okay, so we have some bees that even though they're beneficial, we don't particularly like. And probably the most common problem we have here in Alabama is the large carpenter bee. They're actually relatively good pollinators. But because they like to excavate galleries in our home or homes, or decks or whatever exposed wood we have, people don't like them. And I had an uncle who would not believe that carpenter bees were bad, and he had a really nice deck up on Lake Martin, and after a few years it collapsed. They can severely damage wood. And we have a number of extension publications dealing with carpenter bees. We have a number of bees that are annoying. And this little guy, if you look really closely at the photo, you can actually see his tongue out on my skin. And so a number of bees, primarily Halictidae, which we call the sweat bees, will do what we call mineralization. They will attempt to get minerals that are exuded on our skin during perspiration. And sometimes when we try to brush them off, they will sting us accidentally, or because we have pressed them against our skin, they're trying to defend themselves. But those stings are considered minor. You'll have the occasional client who seems to have an unusual response to them, but afflicted sweat bee stings in general are minor. So looking at bees worldwide, more than 70% of them actually live underground. In this country, we talk about having ground bees or digger bees, and that's not just one little entity. It's ground nesting bees of all the bee families we have. Now, andrenids, apids, coletids, halictids, megachilids, melitids. But the ones that we get the most calls about are the andrenidae or the coletidae. And those in Alabama normally emerge mid to late March, April, normally about the time I'm giving Master Gardener talks, because it's not unusual for me to get calls the next day and said, yes, that was wonderful. We had them start coming out today. It happens. And we have a number of extension publications concerning ground bees. They almost refuse to sting. They're solitary. Their goal in life is to reproduce. If you think in human terms, their goal in life is to reproduce, not defend. They aren't worker bees. They're all queens, so to speak. The sting is minor, and many of those coletids, which are one of the most common ground or digger bees we have, and are as large or slightly larger than a honeybee, their stinger, so to speak, is so lightly sclerotized or armored that it will not even penetrate human skin. So, sort of summing up on ground bees, extremely important native pollinators. Most in North America are solitary, but they tend to nest in large numbers where there are favorable nest sites. That is, the soil conditions are perfect. Everybody wants to live there. So those sites are usually sandy, well-drained. They like some sun exposure. They're often on southern slopes. And some of these are extremely important pollinators of apples, blueberries, and cherries. And we'll talk about one of those in a couple of minutes. So going back to ground bees, the client, as I mentioned, will often report several different kinds of bees present in the nesting area. And the males are different because they have yellow faces, longer antennae, and sometimes they're noticeably smaller. And again, the males can't sting, but you have to convince the client they cannot. And you can also have male and female kleptoparasites present. They are usually more wasp-like appearance. They're not as hairy. And again, the males have yellow on the face and may be smaller than the females, and they look different. So they'll think they have 4 different bees swarming in their front yard, and they have 2 and just males and females of each. And so ground bee management is try to educate everyone that calls in. Stress that these bees cannot, in some cases, or will not sting unless you almost force them to do so. They're only going to be present for a few weeks. And for that client who is just terrified and has to do something, a heavy watering, if you can do it in your area, if you're in California right now, and I expect you could get a fine for trying to relocate your ground bees by watering, but a good, what we consider the equivalent of a good 1-inch rain will usually get ground bees to move along. So one very important ground bee is called the southeastern blueberry bee. It is considered the consummate blueberry pollinator. And the latest estimate I could find on value for these bees is that each bee is worth about $75 to the blueberry industry. They resemble small, I am really going fast, so I need to slow down here. I get wound up. They resemble small bumblebees. They're only present in the spring. They're one, I don't consider this a great photo, but I have taken probably several thousand photos of these guys. They just don't stay long at a flower. But they do not cheat. And what do I mean by cheat? Bumblebees and carpenter bees also visit blueberries. They will often reach around the opening, because the opening to the flower is very narrow. They will reach around the side and chew a hole through the bottom of the petal, corolla. And they will extract pollen that way, and nectar, and they will miss the stamens. The stamens are what produces the pollen. So they are not pollinating. Very often, bumblebees and honeybees do not pollinate the blueberries they visit. But the nice little southeastern blueberry bee sticks his tongue down every flower, and she also buzzes that flower, which is required for blueberry pollination. And each one of those little bees visits up to 80,000 flowers. I mean, that is an amazing statistic. And we could go on about bees probably for another hour, which would sort of run us over the hour we were allocated. And I'm sure many of you work with honeybees or honeybee maintainers, beekeepers. Africanized honeybees is a hot topic. Squash bees almost deserve their own conversation, as do bumblebees. Giant resin bees in the South, we get calls on those with some frequency. Have calls about chimney bees. All these things you can look up and do your own investigation, but they're all worthy of their own discussion at some point. So let's move on to the wasp. And so I'm going to read you a couple of definitions and just basically show you that the definition of a wasp is not well defined. There's no good definition. Webster is any of various families of winged hymenopterous insects, characterized by a slender body with the abdomen attached by a narrow stalk, that's the petiole, biting mouth parts, and in the females and workers, a vicious sting that can be used repeatedly. If you open any entomological text, they assume you know what a wasp is, because I could not find a single definition of a wasp in an entomological text. In fact, some of the older texts use, rather than saying ichneumon wasp, they say ichneumon flies to differentiate them from wasp. Another wasp definition, if you Google wasp and ask for the definition, it is a noun. We all knew that. A social winged insect that has a narrow waist and a sting. It constructs a paper nest from wood pulp and raises the larvae on a diet of insects. That's not a bad definition by the time we put it together with the bottom half, which is a solitary winged insect with a narrow waist, mostly distantly related to the social wasp and including many parasitic forms. So going back and trying to get a definition of wasp, everywhere I looked at what they considered Hymenoptera, what each entomological text author thought that Hymenoptera consisted of. So many of them can just call them the bees, wasps, and ants, or the wasp, ants, and bees. A couple of texts, bees, wasps, ants, etc. Another one was sawflies, parasitic wasps, ants, wasps, and bees. Another, sawflies, ichneumons, chalcids, ants, wasps, and bees. Another was ants, wasps, bees, and sawflies. So one thing you'll notice in there is every group, every definition or general description of Hymenoptera included ants. There's a major group of the Hymenoptera, but if you're a hymenopterist, you know that ants are technically a type of what they consider wasp, again, without definition. So the family of ants, Formicidae, is part of the superfamily Vespoidea, which doesn't mean anything to you, but that's the social wasp and their kin. All the ants are different because they have one or two nodes between that middle body or mesosoma and the rest of their body. And the ants have geniculate, which means elbowed antennae. And ants are truly important. Some people consider ants the dominant life form on the planet. Again, ants are a topic for another day, and there's a topic for several other days. So we were talking about the aculeate Hymenoptera, those Hymenoptera with a sting that has evolved in many to be defensive or a way to bring down prey. And so this term eliminates the braconids and the ichneumonids, or ichneumons. And many of these commonly sting us, even though that sting apparatus is still used for egg laying. The sting is minor. I mean, Ophion, and I have been stung repeatedly by Ophion. I don't consider it a problem at all. Yes, I can feel them sting them, and yes, it hurts, goes away in a few minutes. But some individuals complain that the pain is severe as that of a paper wasp. But going back to wasp, all the adult wasps, as opposed to bees, as do bees, use nectar for fuel. It's like they run to a flower to gas up so they can go out and hunt. But they are hunting for other arthropods. And those arthropods are fed to the larvae by the adults in some form or fashion. So we're going to divide the wasp into two somewhat artificial groups. We're going to call them social wasp and solitary wasp. And with the social wasp, there's, again, two main groups. There are paper wasps, and I've got the scientific names, family names and subfamily names up there. And then there are the yellow jackets. And these, I am sure each extension agent gets lots of calls about. So paper wasp, pretty much all in this country, I say all, there's actually one that's not, members of the genus Polistes. But they share this behavior of they all build a single layered net. Paper nest is paper. We'll talk about what the paper is composed of in a few minutes. And it's connected to a support by what we call a pedestal. So you've all knocked down paper wasp, and on the back of the comb, there's a little piece of this actually strong paper that is glued to the structure that is holding the nest. With paper wasp, the colonies are built around what we would normally say queens, but some people prefer to use the term foundresses, because the queens, although they're on average larger than the workers, look morphologically the same. They look the same. The smallest queens are smaller than the largest workers. So there's an overlap in the size, but that's the primary difference, is just average size. So you cannot look at a Polistes nest without getting really close, which most of us won't. And you cannot look at that nest and guess who is actually laying the eggs. Who's the queen there? And paper wasp, many of the colonies are actually started by 2 to several of these foundresses working together. And so they're all capable of laying eggs, but one of them generally becomes the alpha female, just like the alpha male in lion herds. You know, one of them does all the reproduction, and everybody else is either driven away or becomes very submissive. With paper wasps, some of the females, the foundresses, will continue to lay eggs, but it's sort of on the slide. They'll sneak an egg in here and there. The workers that they produce can lay eggs, and in fact, during the reproductive phase of the colony, which is normally late summer, early fall, the workers do lay a fair number of eggs, but all of their eggs develop into males. Most paper wasp colonies are built under shelter, although there's some that are simply attached to branches or twigs. Polistes annularis, the really large one with a single ring around the black abdomen, is one that really likes to build near water. Is simply on a piece of twig or branch over water. So again, the adults are feeding on nectar for fuel, and they are feeding their larvae chewed up caterpillars exclusively. So paper wasps are valuable biocontrol agents for caterpillars. That's been recognized by farmers long before biological control became popular. I can remember taking courses, and I'm going to date myself here, in the early 1970s, and the instructor was talking about farmers building shelters around their field borders for the Polistes to have a place to put a nest. And we have more than 20 Polistes in the U.S. and Canada. Paper wasp, if they lived out away from where we live, they would be wonderful animals. And in fact, they are wonderful animals, but they conflict with humans in 2 basic ways. Their nest construction, and then we'll talk about their overwintering. With their nest construction, there's a lot of clients who do not want a nest on their home because they think that the wasp will become aggressive and will attack them. And some people just don't like their home being, they feel the aesthetics is being damaged by having a wasp nest on it. And the other major conflict is selection of an overwintering site. Wasps often enter homes in the fall, and if they aren't detected in the fall, then they become trapped in the spring when they're trying to find their way back out. And with a flourish, he made a mess at his desk. So, nesting problems. The eaves and overhangs of our homes, favorite nesting spots. They're high, they're dry, they have something at their back on sometimes 2 or 3 sides so they can see everything that's coming at them. And the wasp, at least the worker wasps, are going to defend that nest if they're threatened. So if the nest is right above your front door, they may feel threatened every time someone walks in and out. If it's in a high corner at the far end of the porch, you're probably never going to threaten them. If it's up really high, they're not going to have any interaction with humans. One of the problem areas is they build under the railing on decks, and that can be, if you've got a lot of people put decks around on the back for patios and for barbecues and just sitting out and enjoying themselves. And now they're sitting in a level or walking very close to some nests where the workers are going to defend those nests. So they can be a real nuisance. If it's early in the spring and there's only a single foundress on that nest, she is not going to sting. Remember, her goal in life is to reproduce. And so if you can simply remove her nest, she's going to relocate, put her nest in another spot, or very often one that starts a nest and loses it, she'll team up with another foundress. And she probably becomes something less than the alpha female. But providing paper wasps with alternate nesting sites away from your home proper can cut down on the number of Plistes wet nests that you might have. Doesn't guarantee anything. Plistes can be real shoppers as far as a new home. So these alternative nesting sites, they can be homemade, they can be purchased, they're really simple. The only maintenance you'd have to do is remove the old nest each winter. Plistes do not use old nests. That nest, once at the end of the season, wasps will never use it again. And we have a nice little diagram from North Carolina State on our slide. The fall conflicts occur because Plistes overwinter in a variety of places, but the higher the drier. The higher and drier, the better. And some authors consider all, are attracted to what we call monumental structures, the highest object in the area. Very often that highest object may be the peak of someone's home. So the overwintering wasp are either fertilized foundresses or queens, or in a few cases, that Plistes annularis, that one that likes to build near water, they'll be both unfertilized foundresses and males. Most of the male wasps are only found in late summer and fall and do not survive into the winter. These overwintering wasps, if they're in your attic, their goal in life is to live till the spring so they can begin reproducing. They don't have a nest to defend. They do not want to sting you. And this was, the wasp in the photo was in my attic. This is probably Plistes metricus, and there's about 3 species that overwinter in my attic each year. So they fly to high, dry areas, so they fly to roof peaks, and they can enter the attic area through some real narrow little or small openings. And once inside, they usually cannot find their way back out if you're coming in through tiny, small openings, and most will eventually die there. In some buildings, they will find their way, as they're looking for a way out, they'll find their way into the inhabited areas of the building. And I teach a Master Gardener course in Calhoun County, usually early spring, and they overwinter in the attic of that building, and they come out into the master gardener teaching area. And there'll be 2 to 6 to 8 usually pop up during our talk on entomology, and we get to talk about wasps and the fact that we don't need to kill bees and we'll turn them loose and they're not going to hurt anyone. But these wasps, again, are not a sting hazard. These congregations in attics and other places are often mixed species and basically reflect the local mixture of species. So I have about 3 around the outside of my house. I have 3 in the attic each year. Fire towers truly do offer the ultimate high dry attraction. They can be, remember, they're monumental. You can be seen for miles. And the wasps spot them and fly to them. And I have been on a fire tower in September, and it is amazing. There are tens of thousands of wasps that sometimes crowd into the tiny attic of a single fire tower. You can have a ball of wasps the size of a basketball. Again, they're not a sting hazard, and the foresters up in these towers have come to recognize this without us even telling them. I mean, we're going up the tower, and there's a cloud of wasps, and they aren't going to sting you. That's what the foresters say. But if you ever want to see a true spectacle of nature, go to a fire tower in September. So let's switch gears and talk about the yellow jackets and their kin for a few minutes. And if someone will need to, okay, my clock is recycling, so I have no idea where I am on time. If I start running over, just let me know. Okay, the yellow jackets and their kin, and the yellow jackets are called the Vespini. And there's 2 or 3 groups, depending on how you interpret it. And this is where we get the term hornet. Now, one major interpretation is that yellow jackets nest in the ground, hornets nest in trees. I don't agree with that one, and we'll go into a little further on why. But the second interpretation, which I do agree with, is that yellow jackets are in the genus Vespula, and that aerial yellow jackets, and we'll talk about a few of those, are in the genus Vespula, and that the true hornets are in the genus Vespa. So, what does Webster have to say about hornets? Any of several large social wasps, family Vespidae, strikingly colored yellow and black. Well, that would eliminate ball-faced hornets. American insects, herb ross, species of Vespini that nest above ground. That goes along with interpretation 1 on the previous slide. If you Google hornet, it is a large stinging wasp that typically nests in hollow trees. We'll talk in a minute. Vespa usually nests in hollow trees. There's various sources say that a hornet is a wasp of the genus Vespa, and I agree with that. But the end result is that you cannot have a small hornet. A hornet is a large wasp, so how can you have a small, large wasp? So when you get the calls, you have a small hornet, you can start assuming that it's not a hornet and try to guide the client into a better description. So now let's talk about what is a yellow jacket. Well, the technical definition for a yellow jacket is this North American. It's a predatory wasp of the genus Vespula or the genus Vespula. And these wasps occur over the entire northern hemisphere, and they've actually been introduced into the southern hemisphere. But in other English-speaking parts of the world, they simply call them wasps. So if you were in Great Britain, they call the yellow jackets wasp. It's a North American term. But it works well in North America because almost everyone recognizes the term. The yellow jacket nest is constructed of flat combs of cells that are suspended by one or more of those pedicels or stalks, as you can see in this photo. Furthermore, the the combs are multi-tiered, so every nest I've ever seen had more than one tier of nest, and they're all protected by a bag-like outer envelope. And we'll see in a minute that that includes the underground ones. And if those of you who are participating in the Get the 8x10 photo, this is our first typo of the day. But yellow jackets, the colors can be yellow and black, which is the typical prototype yellow jacket, but they can be, by our definition, also black and white, the ball-faced hornet, black and white. But if you go further north, you have some yellow jackets that have a considerable amount of red on the body. This is Vespula rufa, which is the red yellow jacket. So within yellow jackets per se, there are two basic lifestyles. There are the aerial nesters, which some people consider hornets, and there are the cavity dwellers, which are the typical yellow jackets. So talk a little about the aerial nesters. The genus Delisco Vespula normally build their nest in an above-ground exposed location. Now, the prototypical nest is hung in a tree. They vigorously defend the area around the nest. And if you throw rocks at them, that area will expand. The cavity dwellers, they'll conceal nest, usually in an abandoned rodent nest. So when you have the yellow jacket nest in your lawn, you probably had a vole or a mouse there last year. However, any cavity will work. Inside a bag, inside a box, inside the wall, between the walls in your home, and an attic, as long as it's a cavity. Yellow jackets defend the area around the opening to that cavity. They mark it with a pheromone that says, defend this to the death. And there will be workers stationed at the entrance to make sure nothing comes in, and if anything actually gets within, I think University of Florida did a study, about 14 inches, they'll fly out to at least investigate. But if you look at our diagram here, you basically have the same nest construction. It has an envelope around a large number of tiers of cells, and the opening is actually at the bottom. So they enter the, let's just say this is an underground nest. They enter at soil level and go all the way to the bottom of the nest and then back up. And so yellow jacket nests begin as a single cup-shaped cell, which this nest in the photo is actually a little further along. And then the queen, who's doing all the work, and we'll talk about the queen is the only one that overwinters. This is one queen doing all this work. She builds one cell, she lays an egg, actually as it starts, and she keeps adding cells to form a comb. Each cell is hexagonal, just like the honeybee cells. They're cylindrical, and they always open downward. They rear one larva in one cell. They may reuse that cell, but it's only one larva at a time. So when in the construction phase, the egg is laid in a cell cup as it is being built, and then the tiny larva that hatches is fed and cared for in the cell, and the larva is fed macerated arthropods, and we'll talk in another slide about what those might be. The larva pupates within that cell and spins a white silken cap over the cell, just like the white caps you see on Plistes nest, and then the adult wasp emerges. The cells may be used 2 or 3 times in a season, but as fall approaches, more and more the cells are left vacant, but they don't fill them with food. No food is stored in yellow jacket nests. And they do not reuse abandoned nests, just like the Plistes. They build a nest, and as long as it's active, they may add on, but once it's abandoned, it will never be reused. So what are these nests made of? All of the nests, both Plistes and yellow jackets, are made from paper. The wasps are harvesting wood fibers from weathered wood surfaces, at least in the case of yellow jackets. They macerate or chew the wood fibers and mix it with their saliva to form paper, which we call carton. And we're going to see a close-up of paper here in a minute, but the different colors reflect different sources of cellulose. So you have, in a yellow jacket colony, you may have several hundred workers out collecting fibers. They're all over the place collecting fibers. Each wood has its own little color when it gets back. And here's actually a photo of a worker in Monroe County, Alabama, and she's pulling wood fibers off of a strand board shed. And this is a close-up of some of their paper, and the white, the gray, the brown, that all came from different wood sources. Now, with yellow jackets, there's a true caste system. They are considered highly evolved, as opposed to the Pleiades, which are not as highly evolved, at least as social insects. The mother of the colony is termed a queen, and she's in this photo, the insect on the left, and she is much larger than any of the other castes. So the largest insect in a yellow jacket colony is always going to be the queen. She does most of the egg laying. Again, the workers can lay eggs, but they're going to be all males. So most of the wasps produced at least early season are workers. And the workers are the ones who are doing literally all the work. They brood care, nest expansion, defense. They're out pulling paper fibers to expand the nest. And again, they can lay eggs. They don't really lay many early in the year, but all of their offspring are going to be males. When the colony goes into the reproductive phase, which is yellow jackets typically late July, August in central Alabama, they'll start producing larger cells, and the workers will start laying eggs in the cells that will produce the males. So the queens, which are the largest ones in the colony, and they typically are differently colored, much stouter bodied, they initiate the colony. They are also the overwintering stage. They are the egg producer. Once the queen gets her first little batch of workers out and working for her, she typically never flies again. And then we have a third caste, which are the males. They are intermediate in size between the workers and the queens. You'll typically only see males late August, September. They'll be out feeding on flowers and looking for queens to fertilize. And they only live for just a few weeks, so you'll only find males late season.
Excuse me, Charles.
Yes.
It's 2 o'clock, so I don't know if you could wrap up in a few minutes the webinar.
I'm going to speed up.
We're really enjoying it, but we are at our time limit.
Okay. I had a nice little clock here, and it recycled twice. Okay, lots of species. The nests are generally aerial, not because they're so high above the ground. It's typically nothing to worry about. The aerial nests are typically smaller numbers. Wasp. This is the ball-faced hornet distribution. They primarily feed on houseflies and other yellow jackets. I've witnessed this. They catch prey in flight. Their nests are often so high they're not going to be a problem because they leave horizontally. They never drop down to fly. The number one wasp problem is the cavity dwellers. Eastern and southern. Southern actually parasitizes eastern by the queen entering the eastern nest and killing her and taking over. And we will skip through. You can read about all of this. Southern yellow jacket, which has the 2 stripes down the middle of the dorsum, unique in North America except one in California. They're a facultative nest parasite. You can tell eastern yellow nests apart by the size of the cells. And there are some others. Some of the worst yellow jacket problems I've ever seen were in a park in Arizona where there was a campground. I wondered why no one was there until we put out our food. And then there were yellow jacket nests everywhere. Had to eat, because I was collecting wasps or insects, ate before daylight, ate after dark, ate in the car at lunch. And the German is in North America, 28 states. In New Zealand, they build colonies that may weigh a ton because there's a lot of overwintering colonies. Yellow jackets are important in a number of areas, but we really haven't documented. This is probably the most important slide I've got, which I really want everyone to see, is that if you leave people, anyway, there's a lot of people out there who think gas is the answer. And this is this client sent in this photo. He poured 2 gallons of gas, a gallon of motor oil, a can of Hornet spray, 2 fire extinguishers, and a gallon of insecticide into the ground. And the yellow jackets were still coming out. Education. And yellow jacket nests can become perennial, like the ones we described in New Zealand. The true hornets are the genus Vespa. We only have one in this country, the European hornet. Big guy, builds nest in hollow trees. And then we have the solitary vespids, some other solitary wasp. Cicada killer wasp is not going to hurt. Try to convince a school principal. Bigger wasps, velvet ants, one of the 2 solitary wasps that really, really hurt. And the spider wasp is the other group. A lot of the spider wasps patrol the ground looking for spiders, and they often fly up pants legs. My wife will swear to this, and boy, did she swear when she encountered her first one. And I thank you.
Okay, at this time, if there are any more questions, go ahead and type them into the chat box. Thank you, Dr. Ray. We really appreciate you taking your time for us today. And Suzanne, will you mind posting the poll questions? If y'all all would stay on just a little bit longer and answer, we have 4 poll questions for you. And then we also have a Qualtrics survey. If you will look in the chat box, it has been posted by David Kuhn. It's through Auburn University. We have a few more questions in addition to these 4. And then don't forget to mark your calendars. We invite you to join us next month on October 2nd for Keep Ants and Cockroaches from Ruining Your Holidays. That will be presented by Elizabeth Wizzy Brown. And don't forget, the recording will be available next week on September 8th, and you can view it on the Extension website, or the link will be on the Facebook page.
I think, Lucy and Charles, that we've answered all the questions. Tim Davis and Sean Banks and David Kuhn were typing constantly during the webinar, and we thank them for that. If anybody has a question we didn't answer, if you type it right in the chat box right now, and we will make sure we answer it. Turning it back to you, Lucy, in wrap up.
Okay. Well, the poll questions look like they're finished. Suzanne, you can go ahead and take those down. Again, the Qualtrics link is there in the box. And we hope that you will all join us again next month and have a happy Labor Day weekend.
Oh, we have a question about mud daubers.
Dr. Ray, are you still on the line?
Yes, I am.
What about mud daubers? We have a question from Sandra. She's asking about mud daubers.
Okay. Does she have a specific question? They would have been. They can sting. Almost refuse to. Most are beneficials. Some of them provision those mud nests with caterpillars. Others will specialize in spiders. The main probably complaint we have is they build them they like to have a high dry spot again, or a dry spot, so they like to build them under some shelter, which is often our structure, our homes or some other building. So they're not going to hurt you. They really, their toxin is really designed to paralyze caterpillars and spiders, doesn't seem to have a lot of effect on humans. So they're not going to be painful. They're not going to want to sting you because, again, their goal in life is to reproduce, not defend. And if one did get trapped under your skin, it can sting you, but it should not hurt particularly.
Okay.
That
Thank you.
answer?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so. I believe that answered her question. She said, extremely smart, gentle, and they seem to return each year to the same site. Is that normal for mud daubers to return to the same site year after year?
It's probably a favorable site. It's like all the digger wasps seem to like a spot. Why do they come back to that spot? Because it's sandy, has minimal vegetation, has some sun exposure in that southern slope.
Okay. Dr. Ray, a few people have mentioned that you had great pictures and also are asking if your PowerPoint slides would be available. So we pointed out that you provided your email address. Is that all right if they contact you if they would like?
It would be fine. I can definitely release my own photos. When I was putting this together, I was using another presentation. I had a list of the other photos and I lost it. Which is why some of those say photo unknown. But if it's my photo, I'll be happy to share it.
Okay. We have another question. Can wasps actually bite?
They can, well, yeah, they can bite. I don't think they can break the skin. I've been bitten. I've never had my skin broken. So they could nip. And I've never had a true hornet on my skin and try to bite me. They are large enough. They look like they could probably break the skin. But yes, they can bite. Are they going to bite you? Not if they can sting you.
Okay. All right, there's a few more people typing, so we'll see if they have questions. Are there any good remedies for bites? If they do bite or for a sting?
The sting, I would send them to a website, WebMD or something. There's a lot of them out there, and I would suggest they go on the web to look for that answer. I don't normally answer medical questions, so.
Okay.
The problem is the stings don't really bother me that bad. I've been stung by yellow jackets hundreds of times, and they aren't particularly painful to me. I'm very lucky.
Right, okay. Yeah, so that is more of a medical question. We have one more question that has come across. Do the queens sting or bite?
The queens can sting, but they almost refuse to do so.
Okay.
The queens, their goal in life is to reproduce. And so they're going to try to escape before they will probably not attack you, so to speak. If you get one under your shirt, crush it against your skin, they will sting you. That's the last resort. But for the queens, their behavior is sting only as a last resort.
All right. Well, thank you for answering all those questions. We appreciate it. It seems that most people are beginning to log off. So thank you for your time. Kathy, is there anything else, any more announcements?
Not that I can think of. Please join us next month, and thank you, Charles, very much again for your webinar.
You're welcome, and I'll call you separate later.
Okay.
But anyway, I enjoyed it. I really did.
Good. So I think we can stop the recording, and